the redirection of eros. Can you just talk about this theme and how it relates to the spiritual life? And you brought it up in the book, and particularly in the context of somebody may be experiencing sexual temptations, but being able to sort of redirect those energies towards a more passionate pursuit of God, or perhaps a life of penance, or any number of more of higher things.
But basically, this comes back to reconceiving of ourselves in terms of our most basic vocation and call, which is to love, to know and love God. And it is a self-understanding and a conception which is rooted in a theological truth, which is that we are created in the image of God with a call to become like God, and therefore to own that somehow in the depth of me there is that the imprint of that image which no circumstance and no sin even can erase, even though they can cover the image with a lot of mud to the point of making it unrecognizable, and to the point of making us quite forget about it. But somewhere deep within me, there is that image which is like a response to a call that I hear from outside myself. That's what I like to refer to as the deep human energy of longing. That sense that there is something in me that calls out for a fulfillment that entirely exceeds me. And that is the basic erotic impulse of human nature. Eros not being reducible merely to the sexual realm, but being that vital energy for life, the desire for fullness of life, the desire for life in plenitude. What can happen because of our fallenness, because of the traps that our limited notion of self and the wound of sin inflicts, that erotic movement towards life and goodness and beauty can become sidetracked. And that sidetracking is what in scriptural and theological language we think of as sin. Another etymology which I account for in the book, and which I find is very, very useful. In our oldest sources, the Greek word hamartia, which is the New Testament word for sin, has an extremely down-to-earth and practical meaning. In ancient Greek, hamartano, to sin, doesn't refer to moral failure, but it is a term from the vocabulary of sports, and it refers to missing a target. Like when you're throwing a javelin, or trying to hit a target with a bow and arrow, and your arrow flies in a different direction. That's what sin is. And with time, the same cluster of words came to indicate missing a road, missing the point, taking a wrong turn, etc. And that's why the key to conversion is to recognize that any erotic impulse, any impulse within myself which is truly a longing for life, even if it has become attached to a wrongful, a lesser, perhaps an idealized, divinized goal, to something which I've made into a molten calf, or into a false god. That energy is not in itself a diseased energy. It's simply an energy which has been funneled in the wrong direction, that needs to be reclaimed. Because I think an error which we can easily make is to think that, gosh, in order to get away from this thing which is perhaps, a compulsion, an obsession, an habitual sin, whatever, I just need to cut this thing off once and for all and be done with it. But that is in fact taking me into very, very dangerous territory, because the vital energy may in itself be good and wholesome. It's simply been channeled wrongly. And that's why the reorientation of eros is such a crucial part of the ascetic journey, which is a journey towards fulfillment and maturing, and towards fullness of life. Because, it's so important to remember that what we're called to is life.
And if I may just very quickly ask, how does that differ from the notion of sublimation of eros that you mentioned briefly in the book?
I'm a bit skeptical to the notion of sublimation, because it can become so intellectual, whereas eros mostly manifests itself in our lives in terms that are, very embodied and very incarnate. So there's nothing wrong about the notion of sublimation as such, as long as I don't fall into the dualist temptation of making of embodied experience and the claims of my physical being abstracted entities, because it's in my incarnate integrity that I'm called to pursue wholeness and sanctity. And, ultimately, we're called to make ours the great confession towards the magnificent finale of the book of Job, that in my flesh I shall see God.
So sublimation would refer to then the impulse becoming sort of subsumed into some higher thing, but not only one's goal is higher, but the mode of seeking it is somehow detached from the fleshly reality that.
Yeah, that's the risk, that I start thinking of myself as a brain on stilts, or as a disembodied soul, and it's that's also when I risk falling into some of those traps of assumptions or presumptions of having reached kind of a state of fulfillment, completeness,
right.
Being outside the realm of risk, which is also a realm of possibility, and where I then am I'm in danger of really falling flat on my face.
Which would seem to be connected with repression in the negative sense, meaning sort of a dishonest denial of one's actual,
absolutely,
impulses.
Mm.
Okay, great. Thank you for
which
that.
Is ultimately a denial of my physical being, and that risks becoming a blasphemy, because
right.
my incarnate being is part of the state of grace in the absolute sense that God has given me in order to realize within it something graced and beautiful.